Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Coffee with Katie. I have my Spider-Man mug today and some chocolate puri tea, which is delicious, but also really caffeinated, which helps. So today's video is going to be a review on Gallant by VE Schwab. This is her newest release that just came out in March. So I found out that the day this released, it also released on Scribd, and I was really excited because I knew I wanted to read this book. It was an anticipated release of mine, and when I saw that I could listen to it, I immediately did. As soon as it came out, and I think I finished it in like 3 days. It felt like it flew by because it was really fun. And then I also got this like signed first edition, and it's a cool little shape. It's kind of like boxy, kind of square shaped instead of like rectangle. So it's really interesting. And first off, let me just show you this book. So the cover's really pretty, obviously everybody's seen it. It's got this like glossy finish, even though this is like a papery feel. On the back, it says, "Everything casts a shadow, even the world we live in." And when you take off the dust jacket, there's not really a lot underneath. It has this little embossing that you can barely see, Gallant. And then, as I said, this one is signed by VE Schwab. The end papers are really pretty, and there's a lot of art in this book, which I love. So I'll give you an example. It has like little pictures like this in it. Throughout the book, it has things like this. So it's really pretty, but let's go ahead and get into the review of the book itself. So I really enjoyed this book. It's very atmospheric, I think, and it kind of paints a very gloomy picture. And like kind of the buzzwords I would use to describe this right off the bat is like eerie, disturbing, dark, and magical. And I thought it was a really fun time. I like that this is a standalone. It's a YA novel. I also kind of like the whole rebranding that VE Schwab did, where she's no longer Victoria Schwab for young adult novels and middle grade novels, and then VE Schwab for adult. I like that she's VE Schwab all the way around now because I just think it's cooler and it makes more sense, and I wouldn't want to have to change my branding depending on my audience, so that's really cool. There are plenty of gorgeous editions of this, and actually I may have another one coming. Stay tuned. But basically what this story is about is you're following the main character, Olivia Pryor, and she's in a children's home and she doesn't really know anything about her family except a journal that was left to her, which was her mother's. And she's read it and she's memorized it, but she still doesn't have a lot of clues about where she comes from, and a lot of the writing seems to be confusing or unhinged or just not very clear and a little sinister. And that's her only clue to the life she never knew. And as she's reading the journal, it seems like her mother was kind of unraveling. And then one day Olivia gets a letter that beckons her home, and she's kind of taken aback because she doesn't know where this letter came from, and it's saying it came from her uncle and that she has to go home to Gallant. But that is the one place her mother's journal told her never to go because she would be safe as long as she never returns to Gallant. That being said, Olivia doesn't know anything about her life or her family, so she goes. And as she arrives at Gallant, she finds her only living relative in this mysterious house called Gallant. And it's this kind of older, maybe a little bit rundown house with a garden that needs a lot of upkeep and this crumbling stone wall that has an iron gate, a gate she must never open. And while Olivia enjoys all of this and enjoys having a place that she can kind of call home, when she does arrive and she likes the place and she's kind of, taking a liking to it because she's never had a place of her own, she finds out that nobody at Gallant actually sent her a letter. And it seems to be kind of secretive and nobody really wants to give her a lot of answers or why she cannot open the gate. And it kind of goes from there in this story of Olivia exploring and figuring out Gallant and maybe what lies beyond the gate. So this book was eerie, gloomy, and lovely. I really liked the atmosphere. I really liked the setting. I loved the writing of this book and how the narrator of the audiobook brought it to life. Obviously, it's VE Schwab's writing, so it was good. I really liked how she painted everything. I loved that you could almost feel how dreary and rainy or sunny it was, depending on the day and what was going on. I loved the mystery in this book that you kind of get to unravel as you go. I liked how the aspects of like reading the different parts of the journal, of her mother's journal, seemed like this really well put together person. Then it seemed like they're kind of getting unhinged and like not making sense, and how that played into the story later. I just thought that was really cool. And the like different things that are lurking about that you don't know if it's dangerous or if it's safe, if it's there to help her, if it's there to hurt her. Like there was a lot of things like that that were really cool. And not just her, like everybody in the house. And they like lock up the house at night, and there's just a lot of mystery shrouding everything. And I guess a lot of like danger looming, or you assume there's danger looming. I also really enjoyed following Olivia's perspective because she is a main character that is mute. And so as a main character that was mute, she needed to sign or use other means of communication. And it was just really cool to see that representation and also to be able to follow writing of a character like that. Like, that was just really cool to me. I really loved it. And I loved how well you were able to still be in Olivia's thoughts and see her communicate with other people, and how she used gestures, even if it wasn't sign language, or used like drawings, and how she incorporated that. I just thought it was so cool. And I liked that it wasn't just representation, but that Olivia being mute played like a big part of the story, and how many hidden pieces in the story you get to uncover as you go. Whereas you could just say like, oh, that's just like how she wrote this character, or that's how she wrote this situation or object. But it's cool that as you go through the story, you see how everything kind of plays a part or has a reason. And I love stuff like that, because I think we see a lot of times where you just write a character for representation's sake, and they're a great character, but that's it. I think it's so much more interesting when you can use a character like that, or an object or a situation, but you can tie it into the story so that it has a greater purpose. Even though the purpose of it existing is also amazing, the way you can use it to tell the story, like VE Schwab did, I think is awesome. I will be honest in saying I did not have high expectations about this book. Obviously, I really wanted to read it. I was really anticipating reading it because it is VE Schwab. When I was looking at the story itself or the synopsis, I was like, that's kind of vague. I don't really know how I feel about it. I don't know how it'll be executed. But because it was VE Schwab, I kind of trust the author at this point to deliver, and she did. One thing this book reminded me of is it kind of gave me Coraline vibes. If you've ever watched the movie Coraline or read the book Coraline, how there's like that other world, that's kind of why it gave me Coraline vibes, about the other world being a little bit more darker and sinister. And that's kind of why I say that. I know other people have compared it to Crimson Peak and The Secret Garden and other things like that. I haven't personally seen or read any of those, so I can't speak to that aspect. I can speak to the Coraline aspect because I've seen that movie. I just loved the world she created, and I loved the like shadow world. I loved how that was incorporated. I loved how it was written and how you could see the differences. And something I didn't really know going in is I think this is actually like kind of a horror, and I wasn't sure it was going to be a horror. I knew it would be dark and maybe scary, but I wasn't sure how it would all play out. But the way she writes the shadow world and the shadow characters was so good. And I don't really want to say a lot about this because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but there's a character, I would say the main character in the shadow world. The way they were written was amazing and terrifying and such a good character. I loved the interpretation of that character because it's like, I don't want to say it's a character we've seen before. It's really hard to describe it without just saying it to you, but it is a thing that's in a lot of books, or could be in a lot of books, or is interpreted in a lot of books. Personify this thing into a character, and that's what she did. And I loved how it turned out. And I loved that it was kind of a good dark versus light type scenario. So cool. And there were so many pieces of the story where you get it in the middle of the book, or like in the beginning of the book, and you're like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Is that a journal entry? What does that mean? And then later on, it clicks and it's pieced together, and you get another piece of the puzzle and another piece of the puzzle. And I loved that. I thought it was so fun. And I said this before, but as it did give me, even though it did give me Coraline vibes, it's also very different than Coraline. It's not the same story at all, anything like that, but just kind of the juxtaposition of the two worlds was what reminded me of Coraline. My goodness, this was a really good book. It took me by surprise how much I liked it, actually. I did end up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. That's nothing negative to say about this book. It's just like, I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. Is it my favorite book of all time? No, but I don't really have much negative to say about this book. I will say I think the beginning maybe was a little bit slow, but not really. It's just telling you the story and getting to a point, and it's a standalone. So she has to start from somewhere, and it's not a very big book. I think the audiobook was like 7 hours long, and there's a lot of like pictures or blank pages in this as you're going through it. So it was a really quick read. It was a really fun read. I highly recommend you read this, especially if you like dark, eerie, creepy writing and creepy worlds. I would definitely give this a shot, and if you like VE Schwab's writing or stories in general. I was trying to find a quote that really stood out to me. There's a lot of beautiful quotes in this book, but there was one that really stood out to me, and I wrote it down, but I think I wrote it down like a little bit different. This is kind of like my paraphrase of this quote, but it was, "Death comes for all of us. Why should that keep us from living?" And I couldn't find it. I tried to find it in the book again and I couldn't find it. And I was trying to search for it online and couldn't find it, but I really loved that quote and it stuck out to me the most. There was a lot of beautiful writing. I loved the twists of the plot. Oh, it was just so good. If you haven't read this and you have any desire to read it, I recommend you grab it immediately. Get it on Scribd, Audible if you can, the library because the audiobook is fantastic, or just grab it if you want to read it physically because there's beautiful illustrations and the way it's written. I think it's kind of one of those books that you kind of want to read physically and you also want to listen to it separately because there's so many things you could pick up if you're reading it physically that you won't necessarily pick up in the audiobook, but the narration of the audiobook was amazing. So just pick this up in some format, and I think you would love it if you like this kind of story. VE Schwab does it again. She can do no wrong, man. Well, that was me just kind of raving about Gallant by VE Schwab, but that is it for today's video. Please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you next time. Stay safe and caffeinated. Bye.